Let's take a look at a small corner of the Sea of Cortez called Agua Amarga. It is, and I mean this literally, an explosion of marine life. It's a global hotspot where orcas hunt, massive whales breach the surface, and huge schools of rays just take flight. By every possible measure, it's a bay of life. You know, the legendary Jacques Cousteau had a famous name for this entire sea. He called it the world's aquarium because of its just staggering biodiversity. And Agua Amarga, it's one of the most vibrant exhibits in that whole aquarium, a place of just profound biological triumph. And that brings us to the central puzzle we're going to unpack here. The bay's official historical name is Ensenada de Muertos, the Bay of the Dead. To figure out why, we've got to do a kind of archaeological dig, peeling back the layers of history, one by one, starting with the most recent. So, the most recent ghosts haunting this bay, they're the ghosts of failed ambition. For decades, outsiders have looked at this pristine coastline and seen not a living, breathing ecosystem, but a blank canvas for making a quick buck. This right here, this really captures the whole conflict, doesn't it? On the left, you've got the developer's fantasy, glossy brochures promising luxury villas and endless growth. And on the right, the hard reality they leave behind, crumbling abandoned infrastructure, totally mismanaged water, and just the skeletons of failed projects. It's a classic recurring pattern of parasitic cut-and-run development. But here's the thing. This is not a new story. As you can see from this timeline, this pattern of failure is nearly 500 years old. Back in 1535, Hernán Cortés himself tried to build a colony here, and it collapsed in less than a year. In 1902, during the plague, a quarantined death ship was supposedly just abandoned in the bay. And of course, in our own century, we see the derelict remains of one real estate scheme after another. It seems like outsiders have always brought their illusions here, never bothering to understand the place itself. Let's zero in on that first, most famous failure. Years after he conquered the Aztecs, Cortés was still obsessed with this popular myth of the time, an island of Amazon women where the only metal was gold. He didn't come here to build a community, he came to extract wealth from what he called the Isle of Pearls. And the cost of that illusion was, well, catastrophic. Cortés dragged about 500 people out here to set up his colony. Within a single year, more than 70 of them were dead from starvation and fighting. The rest? They all had to be evacuated. The whole venture was a complete and total failure. So, why did they fail so spectacularly? Well, it really boiled down to a total mismatch of technology and terrain. The Spanish brought their steel swords and their early firearms, but that stuff was pretty useless in the desert and against guerrilla warfare. The local Guayura people, on the other hand, had an arsenal that was perfectly adapted to the landscape. Obsidian-tipped arrows, fire-hardened darts, and ambush tactics. Their greatest weapon was the land itself. By denying the Spanish resources, they basically just starved them out. It's a timeless lesson, right? Local knowledge will beat imported illusions every time. And the story of the Guaycura's resistance, that brings us to the next layer in our dig. Because underneath all these ghosts of failed invaders, we find the bedrock of this place. The ancient, unbelievably resilient people who first called this bay home. This map kind of shows you the indigenous landscape. We're going to focus on the southern tip, which was the territory of the Paracu people. They were a really distinct group, physically and culturally different from their neighbors, a people whose entire identity was defined by their deep, ancient connection to the sea. Archaeologists call their ancestors the Las Palmas culture, and their practices, well, they give us the deepest, truest origin for the name Bay of the Dead. They practiced what's called secondary burials. They would gather the bones of their dead, paint them with sacred red ochre, and wrap them carefully in palm fronds. And these bundles were then placed in coastal caves, creating literal cemeteries of the sea. The name wasn't a curse. It was a description of a sacred landscape. Okay, now just look at this number for a second. 52.5%. It seems totally abstract, but I promise you, it tells a story of incredible hardship and, more importantly, resilience. What that number means is the percentage of skeletons from the Las Palmas people that show clear evidence of violent trauma, healed fractures, fatal fractures, from clubs, from stones, from spear throwers. Life here was a constant, brutal struggle, not just against the elements, but against each other. These were survivors, hardened by generations of conflict. And this might be the most incredible discovery of all. The skulls of the Paracu are what scientists call hyperdolichocephalic. It just means they were unusually long and narrow. Now, why does that matter? Because that physical trait doesn't match the groups who came to the Americas across a Bering Land Bridge. No, instead, it links them to ancient populations from the South Pacific. It's possible they were descendants of ancient Trans-Pacific voyagers, the original ocean people of the Americas. But this story of resilience, it's not just ancient history. That exact same spirit of toughness, of a deep connection to the sea, is absolutely alive today. So let's jump back to the present and see how the modern community of Agua Amarga is using that legacy as its greatest weapon. They're not fighting with clubs and arrows anymore, obviously. Their weapons today are far more sophisticated. First, they document. Citizen scientists like Paul Bulow of Oto TV are creating an undeniable video and data log of just how valuable this ecosystem is. Second, they legislate. The local ejido, that's a communal land council, uses its authority under the Mexican Constitution to create legally binding environmental charters. And third, they outcompete. Pioneers like Mayra Lucero have developed what's called the Agua Amarga method, a model of high-value, low-impact ecotourism that proves a living, thriving ecosystem is way more profitable than a dead real estate project. And get this quote. This is from a formal letter the ejido sent to would-be developers. It's not a plea for help, it's a declaration of sovereignty. It just perfectly sums up their whole approach. They are not passive victims waiting to be exploited. They are proactive stewards who are setting the terms of engagement. And guess what? The strategy works. This chart shows an economy built not on extraction, but on stewardship. You've got high-value ecotourism, sustainable handline fishing, and community-led conservation, all creating this reinforcing cycle. They make a living not just from the bay, but with the bay. And that brings our little dig to a close. We started with a place called the Bay of the Dead, and we found that its name comes not from failure, but from a deep, sacred, and resilient history. A history that isn't just in the past, but is being used as a powerful tool to shape a sustainable future. So the real takeaway is this. In Agua Amarga, the muertos, the dead, they're not a haunting. The ancient mariners, with their red ochre bones, the indigenous warriors who drove out invaders, even the ghosts of those failed developers, they all serve as guardians, reminding the community of exactly what is at stake and what it really takes to survive. And that leaves us with one last big question. In a world that's facing ecological crisis and predatory development everywhere you look, can this model be replicated? Can other communities learn to weaponize their own unique history, turning their deepest heritage into their most powerful shield? The people in the Bay of the Living seem to think so.